A very specific topic here that really determines your practice that you need to pay attention to, and that's statistics. What statistics to keep, how to keep them. So we're going to spend a couple sessions going over the statistics. There's a couple things that are real determining factors when I talk to a potential new client or a chiropractor that tells me immediately how well they're doing. And I tell you two of them. I'll ask two questions that'll tell me. One is, are they doing staff meetings? They're not that- you can just on it. And number two is statistics. I'm surprised how many times I'll ask simple statistics, like how many patient visits do you see a week, or what's your average number of new patients? Just what are considered normal statistics normal statistics that the doctor doesn't even know. And there's just a rule. To grow your practice, you have to know your statistics, and then your statistics determine what you do. So not only do you want to keep statistics, you got to know certain statistics, but then you got to know how to interpret the statistics to find out, what may be inhibiting you um, to your next growth phase. Remember, it's pretty easy to grow a practice when you know the formula. So when you take, and I'm going to just share it with you right now, when you take the seven major categories, remember, a chiropractic practice has about seven different stages of growth. Seven. From the time you start to not practicing and have full-time associate doctors and just managing. There's seven different stop gaps along the way. And again, most chiropractors aren't aware of this. And usually there's one of seven reasons that becomes a limiting factor. So we pay attention to those seven factors. And then we pay attention to the layout, space, labor, and equipment. And then we will consider the statistics. So when I look at your space, labor, equipment, your layout, and I look at the seven major categories that pretty much where there'll be a stopgap, and then I look at your statistics, that tells me exactly where you are and exactly what you need to do to break through and get to the next level. And most times chiropractors don't realize that. They always think it's new patients, new patients, new patients. I'm like, no. I'll give you a couple examples. Is right now I've got a client. Well, he started with me. He was at 70 visits a week, and he started me with me doing personal injury. So, he was frustrated. His practice wasn't growing any. Uh, so I go, well, wait a minute. Let's do your statistics and see where you're at. Well, it turns out he was losing like two-thirds of his patients by the sixth visit. I go, you don't need personal injury. You need patient retention. So the very first thing we did, I said, why don't we just step back and let's just look at your whole picture and see where you're at instead of just randomly shooting in the dark. And unfortunately, that's what happens too many times. And you won't get very far doing that, by the way. And even if you break through, if you didn't solve the solution, you'll always drop back down to that lowest level. If you didn't solve the problem that inhibited your growth, and let's say you accidentally do shoot up, you'll drop right back down to that lowest level. So anyway, using his as an example, we looked at his space, his labor. So his labor was fine for seeing 70 visits a week. He just had one person. And then he had terrible space layout. He had individual rooms. I'm like, no, we can't do that. You got to go to a therapy bay. And so we had to make the structure of the office more feasible to see more patients. And then the system that he was using for patient retention wasn't very good. So we applied the three phases of healing relative to the therapeutic protocol, relative to the therapy bay. So now he was positioned where he could see a lot more patients at the same time, et cetera. In his old layout, he couldn't. Okay. So then we took patient education And we started working on that. Well, that shot them up to, it was like what, 140 a week. And like, it was fast. It was like in like 3 or 4 weeks. We're just unbelievably fast. Well, his next problem now is second labor. So now they're running their butt off. His front desk person's running their butt off, putting people on and off therapy, answering the phone. And you can't run a practice like that. You can't grow a practice like that. So I said, your next step is to get labor. And usually that's the problem. One of the problems at 120, 130 visits is to free the doctor up to see more visits. So then we got another person, and then he did a certain specific marketing, and that took it up to 200 visits a week. So now he's struggling at 200 visits a week, and he's pointing in the wrong direction. He's looking at everything else but what he needs to fix. I said, you're at your max. That's it. I mean, you're running right against the wall of exchanging time for money. I said, there's a few things, tweaks you can do to start leveraging your time. You can have a staff member start doing the preliminary consultations, the preliminary examinations. You can have a staff member do the patient education, have them take x-rays. All those things help a lot with leveraging time. And you'll be able to see more patients and eke out, a few more, like probably another 50 visits a week, or even just a little higher than that. But you're still going to run your back against the wall. And go until you get that second full-time person, you're going to have these limiting factors, the second full-time person. But now you're associate doctor. I said, your back's against the wall. You're doing everything. You've got your systems in place, you got your marketing in place, you got your patient retention in place. I said, you've got to leverage your time for money. You need now another associate doctor. Another staff member's not going to do it. In other words, we stair-stepped it all the way up to that point. And now he's looking for his associate doctor. So that's the next step. So there were all different problems along the way. So there's 7 different levels of growing a practice. And the limiting factor will either be primarily space, labor, equipment, knowledge or skill, motivation, or HR, human resources. That's one of the 7 problems. And then you go, okay, you look at your layout, your space, your equipment, everything. You look at the stopgap, and then you look at the statistics. So you combine, it's a combination of looking at your statistics. Like in that particular situation, if we wouldn't have looked at statistics, he'd have just been chasing his ass. That's all he'd going on. And that's what most chiropractors are doing. They're just chasing their ass because they're not going to the problem. You don't just start jumping at solutions when you don't even exactly know the problem. So that's the very first thing, is you got to do an in-depth evaluation. And so you look at your space, your labor, equipment, your knowledge, your skill, your HR resources. In other words, is the factory up? Is the factory up? Can the factory process? And then you look at your marketing, what marketing's going on to push people through the factory, so to speak, if all that's in place. And then you look at your statistics to find your weakest link. And so that's how you can grow your practice from maximizing your exchange of time for money. And then you want to especially look at your statistics when you want to start growing your amount of money per unit of time. And then you start leveraging your time and money through staff members and associate doctors, satellite offices, selling offices. So if you understand that formula and you just keep looking to that formula for the problem that's limiting you, and remember, you should look at your office as every quarter, every 3 months. What should happen every 3 months in your practice? You should have either put in place a system that's going to grow your revenue in the next quarter, or you've grown your revenue the next quarter. See, every quarter, every 3 months, that's how you should look at your business. Did my revenue grow because of something that I put in place the last quarter, or am I putting something in place this quarter to help it grow for the next quarter. If you were stagnant in 2 quarters, you're not increasing your revenue, or you're not putting systems in place that's going to increase your revenue in the next quarter. You're now stagnant. And you don't want quarter after quarter stacking up like that. That's when you'll just be stagnant the rest of your life. That's a miserable place to be. Just being stuck in the same rat wheel every quarter, every year, year after year after year. So anyway, having said that, let's spend some time on these statistics and how important these statistics are. Let's go through several of them. Now, this is the new patient statistics. We'll go into some of the major, and there's certain numbers you need to know. You got to keep track of, and you need to know. And what do they mean? You got to interpret them. So let's go into some of these numbers here. So all we do, this is what a new patient statistics looks like. So it's per week. It says week ending, office, the month of. By the way, what you're seeing right now on the screen is exactly what I used for all 77 offices. I just looked at their statistics. That's how I knew where they were every week, is they would send in their statistics, and I would interpret the statistics, and that would tell me their weaknesses or strengths, or what they needed to do next. That's it. I only visited each office no more than 2 times. That's it. I looked at all the statistics every week. That's how I was able to see what was going on and what they needed to do or focus their time and energy on. So having said that, you can see this list Monday through Saturday, and it has the weekly total. So we're always going to put the weekly total and then the month-to-date total. So that's the total new patients here at the top, the month-to-date total. And then we need to pay attention to referrals. Okay, now there's several things we need to pay attention to with referrals. Number one is the number of referrals. Number two is the type of referrals. Remember, when we look at referrals, we're looking at what's called a trusted source, an active or a passive referral. Now, this makes a huge difference in what you're going to be doing in your business. So we go to the active, we're going to go, okay, what's a passive referral? Is just somebody that comes in on their own. You treated somebody good with quality, service, and price, and down the road, they referred somebody into your office. So there was not a direct cause and effect relationship. Direct cause. There was an indirect, but not direct. Okay. So that's a passive referral. Now, remember, passive referrals, only about 7% of the people will refer when they're satisfied with quality, service, and price. It's a low number. That's why you can't wait around for passive referrals. And I show this when we do statistics. So what do we need to know? We need to know the total number of new patients. And by the way, what makes statistics relevant is normals, industry averages. A number is kind of worthless unless you can make it relevant. What's the industry average? So like in new patients, the industry average is 18. Believe it or not, the number of new patients a chiropractic practice gets after 14 years in practice is 18. That's it. Okay. So you go, okay, what's the total number of new patients? Now, the other reason that number is important is when you need to hire an associate doctor, when you need to start leveraging your time, because you can have you can have a certain amount of new patients. Like this one client had a certain amount of new patients. Remember, the average doctor that's good at patient retention can only see about 25 new patients a month. If you're really good at patient retention, it's 20. So the worse you are at your patient retention, the more potential new patients you'll be able to see, because you got time to see them because you're losing them. So you should only be able to, and you got to kind of think this way. You should only really be able to see no more than 25 new patients on your own and see and that number will turn into about 180 to 220 patient visits a week, depending on your therapeutic protocol and how much time that takes. That's kind of what the numbers could turn out to be. So you go, okay, total number of new patients. That's why when I go into a doctor's office and I go, like this one client, he was averaging 33 new patients a month. I'm like, wow, that's great. But it was the same doctor that was seeing 70 visits a week. I'm like, wow, I didn't even have to do his dropout analysis. I already knew he was losing patients left and right because the average chiropractor who keeps them can only see about 25 and max out his practice around 200 visits. Well, he's seeing 70 visits with 33 new patients. I'm like, whoa, you do not. I said, you definitely have a patient retention problem. He was losing them left and right. So see that we got to go where we got to find the problem. Now, after we clean that up, we got to go to the new patients. And what was the bad news about the new patients? Most of them were advertising. And remember, there's only one guarantee with advertised patients, and that's eventually it's not going to work. That's the only guarantee with advertising. And so it's like building a house on a straw foundation. If the majority of your business is coming from advertising, the worst type of patients there are. So that was his second problem. He was getting 33, which is good, but overwhelmingly, the majority of them were from advertising, spending money in advertising. Like, whoa, that's really bad. So that helped. Why? So he had bad knowledge and skill level with patient retention. And then it got worse because he got the hardest type of patient to process, a advertised patient. That's the worst kind of patient. That's the hardest. So then we worked on increasing the quality of new patients because quality of new patients is way more important than quantity. That's like I looked at two of my offices one time, and one doctor had 12 new patients a month. And the other doctor, he was seeing like 28 new patients a month. And who was the one that I was worried about? The doctor seeing 28 new patients. Why? Because the doctor who was seeing 12 new patients, he created 90% of them. In other words, he knew how to get new patients. So he was good to go. It's just up to him how many he wanted because he now knew educational sales and he knew how to get them. It was the guy that was seeing 28 new patients that was the one I was worried about because very few of them were responsible for that he was directly responsible for. He thought it was great. I go, no, you have no idea. You're on very unstable ground. You know, that reminds me of one of the chiropractors I did statistics with one time. He was getting 97%. He was mainly PI. He was getting 97% of his patients from only 3 attorneys. And he wasn't worried. He was living life and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, are you kidding me? You only have 3 sources of new patients. And if any one of those 3 putzes out, you're screwed because he didn't know how to get new patients. Matter of fact, he thought his patient retention was fine. He goes, oh, I'm fine. So we did his dropout analysis on the non-PI. Remember, PI patients are easy with patient retention. We did it on, he had the small percentage that he had of non-PI patients. He lost all of them by the 6th visit. He had no idea how unstable his practice was. So this looking at these statistics is also what creates stability. Okay, so we go to total new patients. So what's the number you should know? You should always know your total new patients, weekly, monthly. That's just an industry standard number. And then what's the average? The average is 18. And you go, well, you can only see about 25 new patients a month if you're processing everything, 20 if you're really good, which means if you're seeing over 25 new patients, you're going to be looking toward an associate doctor, but there's one caveat. Did you create the majority of them? Because if you're getting that many new patients, but in other words, your statistics showed you did not know how to create new business, you're going to be in trouble when you bring on that associate doctor. Even though you're seeing 33 new patients, You need somebody else to help the process the business. Well, what happens when that advertising goes down? Because it's eventually going to go down. Now the statistics are showing that you don't know how to create new patients. Now you're in real trouble. See? So this is the importance of knowing statistics, keeping statistics, interpreting statistics. So total number of new patients, 25 to get, you should be looking at 25 per doctor. And then we're not even talking about patient retention statistics yet. And then we go, okay, of the total new patients, what percentage of them should be proactive versus passive? In other words, you created it. It was a cause and effect relationship. It was because of your referral, your spouse referral program, your monthly in-office program, your reactivation program. In other words, it was a cause and effect relationship, meaning you knew how to create new patients. Okay. So that number should be definitely over 50%. 50%, and you want it up around 70%, approaching 80. That's where you really want that number of what's called active new patients. In other words, you created them. That shows that you are totally in control of your business. So when you got over 50% of proactive patients and you're seeing over 25 new patients a month, you're a new patient machine. You are off to the promised land. Now you can bring on one associate doctor after the next. You can open one office after the next. You can open satellite offices. You can sell offices. You are good. You're gold. You are gold financially, and it's now knowing how to uh, captivate that knowledge and expand it. But when you get over 25 new patients and over 50% of them are proactive, talk to me. This now is a money machine. It's no longer about you just in there treating patients. There's a lot of different venues now to just make it a money machine. Okay, and that's where you want to get. That's where you want your knowledge and skill to get to. Okay, so that's total new patients, and that's the difference between active and passive new patients, and as far as creating them. And then we'll pay attention to referrals. You always want your referral. Now, when we go into referrals, remember we're paying attention to active and passive referrals. Okay, passive referrals are great, but active referrals means you know how to create patients. That's what that means. When I go and look at these practices that to buy diamonds in the rough, I just look at a couple statistics. I look at the number of new patients, the number of passive new patients. In other words, that tells me no matter who's in there, it's going to get that many new patients every month. That's what that tells me. And then I look at the doctor's patient retention. And that's the only two numbers I need to know on how much I'm willing to buy for that practice and how much I'm going to be able to increase it in 90 days. If I'm going to be able to double or triple it in 90 days. That's what those two numbers are going to tell me. So that's what we want to pay attention to with referrals. Are they active or passive referrals? So in your statistics, keep track of the active or passive referrals. That's going to tell a lot about your knowledge or skill level. And by the way, you'll do this with your associate doctors too. That'll tell you a lot. But when you do the active passive referrals, remember that you should have three lists of your patients. It's the 80-17 3% rule. So 80%, remember, the vast majority of your patients will come in and be satisfied with the price, quality, and service and never refer you one person. That's the majority. That's called Pareto's principle. That's normal. Unless you proactively, move these stats. And then the second list, you should have your list of patients who have referred you at least one new patient. One. And I call that the 17% list. And then you have your list of what I call the 3% list. Those are your patients who have referred you two or more patients. Now that becomes unbelievably important relative to marketing, especially when when we look at the 3%, and then we're going to look at whether they're passive. Are they inactive patients or active? So that this will play a major role. So when we're doing anything internally with the office, I'm already going to sequence the highest probability of marketing, the second highest probability to the third highest probability. In other words, when we keep these statistics and I do the in-house marketing, who's the very first people I'm always going to go after? The 3% that are active. That's always the highest probability, number one. Who's the next set that I'm going to go after? The 17% that are active. Who's the next? Okay. Now I'm going to pay attention to the 80%, but I'm going to pay attention to the 3% non-active. Let me tell you, a 3% non-active, a 3% or non-active patient is way more valuable than an 80% that's never referred to you before when it comes to marketing and getting new patients. That's why you need to know these numbers and keep these statistics. Then I'm going to go, where am I going to go next? The 17% non-active. Where am I going to go next? The 80% that are active. And who's the last category that I'm going to pay attention to, time or money, marketing to? It's the 80% that have never referred to me before that are non-active. That's the hierarchy of where I'm going to increase my probability of getting business significantly if I follow that flow chart. And then, of course, if I use educational sales as opposed to advertising or publicity. So this is why statistics, this game of statistics is so important. Okay. So those are numbers you should just know. You should know the total number of new patients, how many you're getting a week, what percent are active, what percent are passive, and what is your percent referral rate, active and passive. That tells you a lot. I look at those statistics on a doctor. It tells me a lot about what he does and doesn't know immediately. When I see low number of new patients and very few active patients, that tells me that doctor doesn't know very much at all. Not much at all. Okay, so continuing on here, you're going to keep track of your reactivations. Reactivations are nice. Now again, there's passive reactivations and active. It's nice to get, I used to average about 3 passive reactivations a week. That's nice when you just get 3, semi-new patients. They're not new patients, but they're not regular visits because I'll at least schedule a reactivation to the first re-exam. So they won't get a full schedule, but they're not just coming in for one visit either. So it's nice when you get a few reactivations. As a matter of fact, I remember I went into one office and he'd been in practice 10 years. And I looked at his statistics and he had no reactivations. What did that tell me? Nobody wanted to come back. After 10 years, nobody wants to come back. Well, the further that I looked into it, he was charging the hell out of them. He was beating them to death financially. I'm like, no wonder you got no reactivations. And he had to cut any passive referrals, terrible. And he didn't know how to create referrals. He was spending a ton of money on advertising to get new patients. This is a client that came to me that initially was bragging that he was collecting $1 million a year. It turns out he was going bankrupt, and that's why he came to me. He had 33 staff members. He was spending a ton of money on advertising just to collect $1 million, and he wasn't going into profit. He was going into bankruptcy. That's a nightmare you want nothing to do with. So reactivations tell me, passive reactivations tell me a lot about the quality of care you're giving. And then the active reactivations. Well, that's a marketing system. So we have staff members that are responsible for the reactivation systems, and they get bonused for these reactivations. Well, that's a system. So we'd like to see 1, 2, or 3 reactivations a week from the reactivation system. And as we created them by being proactive, by picking up the phone and calling them and knowing what to say to activate them to come in. And by the way, if you're growing a practice, one of the fastest way to grow a practice is to market to your existing patients because they already know, like, and trust you. So it's to reactivate them and to get their immediate circle of influence. That's one of the fastest ways. That's why the in-office, the new patient orientation is fantastic. You want to grow a practice fast? Start doing the new patient orientation. You'll start getting a lot of proactive patients fast. So now, for you guys that don't know, the in-office activation, that's a very specific system. And what that is so many times, and I would say at least 20% of your practice, your patients, they come to your office with a family member or friend. And I can't believe how many times the doctors allow that family member or friend to sit in the waiting room and talk with the staff and then leave. When the patient leaves, they leave. That's a potential new patient. So we have a system to get that person as that potential new patient as a new patient. It's called an inactive activation. That's why we never allow them to sit in the waiting room. They're required to come back. And then there's a certain dialogue that we do. So there's certain steps and dialogue that we do to, it's an educational sales system to engage them as a potential new patient. Because remember, every one of those patients are on the S curve somewhere. Every one of your guests are either going to be 8% of them are going to be a chiropractic new patient within a year. Out of the 92%, 3 out of 4 of them have a chiropractic problem to some degree. They're just not looking for a chiropractor. So that's 68%, that's a 68 percentile probability of that person, that guest of your patient, of them being a new patient if you knew educational sales. Because remember, advertising is not going to get them. So there's a lot of potential new patients coming through your office just by coming through being with your patient. Just because they're going to the soccer game together, they're doing this together, they're going grocery shopping, whatever. So that's like easy. That's like a new patient walking in, standing in front of you. You got to know what to say. That's called an in-office activation. And we pay attention to the CA referrals, obviously. And you have to bonus them. Nobody wants to do extra work and get nothing for it. That's why we typically we teach the staff members how the educational sales system. And I'll give you an example where I got new patients all the time. My staff members would leave, and my staff members had on staff office attire. They didn't wear street clothes when they came into my office. They had on their office attire that said my office chiropractic name. And I cannot tell you how many times they would go from the office, they'd go to the grocery store before they went home. They'd go somewhere before they went home. They'd run into somebody and they'd ask them where they work. You know, oh, yeah, I work at a chiropractor's office. Well, if you're a chiropractor, you already know what happens when you tell people you're a chiropractor. How many people go, I got this, or I got that, or whatever. That just happened to me the other day. I was just walking down the hall and lady stops me and says, aren't you, I don't know why she thought I was a massage therapist. She goes, aren't you a massage therapist? I go, no, I'm a chiropractor. And what is the first thing she started doing? She started telling me about her problem. So what did I do? I booked her. I booked her at one of my clients' offices on the spot because I knew educational sales. So we teach these staff members educational sales. I can't tell you that how many times that happened. And that patient came in as a new patient because the staff member was trained in educational sales. So the staff member got $50. Remember, they don't get paid unless you get paid. So you're not losing anything. So they're creating new patients just while they're out at the damn grocery store, just because I taught them educational sales. And now they're creating new patients, and now they're getting rewarded for it. I can't tell you how many new patients I got from that alone. Okay. And then obviously the doctor referral. But the other reason that we want to keep track of where all these new patients are, that's why when they come in, you need to find out where the new patient's coming from. Why? Well, there's a couple of reasons. Number one is how much trust is there? So if I come in and there's a lot of trust, they go, oh yeah, my mom sent me in, and their mom's an active patient. I'm like, oh, I can just move through this fast. I can just hit all the majors and go. Versus a cold call. They don't know anybody, especially if it's a cold call that came in from advertising. I'm like, damn, you better be good. You better all hands on deck. You better be good. You better nail patient, the day one, the day two, the day three, the day four experience. So, but what's the second reason? Is the return on investment. You've got to know your return on investments. How are you going to know that if you don't even keep stats? So we'll go into the numbers, how to look at your return on investments. Well, what are you paying versus what are you getting in return? You got to know how to calculate that number. And if it's, and we'll go into the numbers, but basically, when you get a certain return on investment, I mean, you just want to stick with it and stick with it and stick with it. That's getting you these new patients. And then if you're doing something that's not, you look at the return on investment. You got to recalibrate and go, well, what's going on here? Why, if you're doing some type of advertising or something, that's how you know the return on investment. So that's why it's so important that the doctor get very specific with that new patient and go, by the way, how did you hear about us? And get very detailed, not just, the internet. That's not good enough. Okay. So patient referrals, obviously we need to pay attention to who's referred, because you have to have a system in place that whoever's come in and was referred, they have to be acknowledged. We always want to send them a card, always. And it's even nicer to pick up the phone. But you never get a new patient that was referred by somebody else and not thank the person that referred them. You never do that. You want to kill your referring sources. Don't thank the people that are referring you patients. You'll kill your referring sources. You want to start stimulating them more, start thanking them. That's like one of the quickest ways to get new patients from your local general practitioner is through, when you get a patient that's a patient of your local doctor, you just write out a quick medical report and send it over there for an update. Boy, you talk about exploding professional relationships. They're definitely not used to that from chiropractors. That's normal in the medical world. That's one of the fastest ways to start developing your professional relationships. And there's a little more to it, but that alone carries a tremendous amount of weight. So patient referrals, that's why we need to know patient referrals, who they came from. We got to thank them. Is it a trusted source? We got to thank them. And then we got to put them in the right category. Well, was that an 80%er that's now referred two or more people? And now they're a 3%er VIP? In other words, now they're very valuable to your business. You got to know this. BNI is the business network. That's the only networking system that I actually recommend. I don't recommend anything like the Chamber of Commerce or the Rotary Club. Those are just a waste of time and way too passive. The BNI is actually a real proactive system. So that's the only, but when you know educational sales, you do not even have to waste your time with BNI because it's a lot of time. When you know educational sales, I can create a hell of a lot more new patients in the time that I would spend with BNI. So, educational sales, don't join BNI. And obviously attorney referrals, that's obviously, you need to be keeping track of the attorney referrals. And the same thing, are you thanking the attorneys? When you get a referral, are you sending them a thank you? Say thanks for are you doing that? That's huge, man. It's also huge if you don't do it. And then when we go to the internet, remember, you got to know what part of the internet. Because was it from pay per click? Was it from Google for Business? Was it the organic section? If it was Google for Business or local or organic, you've got to know the key words. If you don't mind me asking, what words did you put in the Google search bar? You've got to know this. You got to keep a record of it. So you know how to reverse engineer, use those words for your SEO and your pay per click. And also remember, several times you'll get somebody that'll say, "Oh, from the internet," and it wasn't from the internet. The more you interrogate them, you go, "If you don't mind me asking, what did you put in the search bar?" They go, "Oh, I put your name, my name." So you already knew to come to me? Did somebody refer you? "Oh yeah, I was just looking, so and so referred me, but I was looking for your address. I didn't know you were where you were located or your phone number." See, that happens a lot. And there's a big difference between a referral who went to the internet to find your phone number and your address versus somebody who went to the internet. There's a big difference. You got to know that that difference. Same with your website. If they were tracking it off your website, or even especially now with YouTube. If you're not aware of it, YouTube's the second highest search engine. That's why videos are, just so important. You have these videos. These are old. These are old, like this says yellow pages here. You can take that out. You can take out any of these other systems that you're not using. And if you are doing something, put in what you are using. Like if you're going to do pay-per-click or something, put in. So in other words, make sure you're listing everything you're getting new patients from. So this is newspaper. So you would take like probably newspaper out. You'd probably take out yellow pages, flyer insert, newsletter insert, direct mailer, doctor lecture, screening, walk-in, other. In other words, all the sources of the new patients should be listed here. And if you don't have it listed here in the other section, write it down where they came in from. You've got to track where every new patient came from for multiple reasons, from the trust of how quickly you can move with them, to thanking the referral source, to looking at your statistics to tell how strong you are with your marketing or weak you are with your marketing, where you need to pay attention, what's your return on investment, whether or not you're whether you're on real stable ground with not only the volume of new patients, but the source of new patients. They were proactive and they were above 20. You get to that arena, you are a new patient machine, and there should be a lot more things going on in your business besides you practicing. A lot more. You got the opportunity to not just associate doctors, satellite offices, selling off offices where you just train them and sell them off. When you're a new patient machine, it opens up a whole new venue of passive income, not just you doing well. So let me put a hold on that for now. We're going to continue for the next several weeks with these statistics, what statistics to keep, why to keep them, how to interpret them. This is the core. Remember, you have to do that. What's the single most important thing to do in your practice? Excuse me, staff meetings. Staff meetings. What's the single most important part of staff meeting? Statistics. That tells you where you're at, where you're going, any future problems, your strengths, your weaknesses. It tells you everything. But it tells you nothing if you're not keeping them or you don't know how to interpret the information.